Good morning, lovely humans. I hope everyone has had a great week and is ready to enter into the weekend with some hope and peace. Today on the Weekly Rise, we are talking about a wind energy project in California. My favorite quote that some might find a little morbid, but I find very inspiring, and a weekly reflection where I talk about media consumption. So let's get started. So today's story comes from the LA Times, and it was written by staff writer Haley Smith, and a link will be provided in the description if you would like to read the whole story. I'm going to hit the highlights and then definitely go and visit the website for the whole story. So, an $11 billion wind and transmission project is now online in New Mexico after nearly 2 decades of preparation. So, I love numbers, so we're going to get into the numbers a little bit, but this is a massive wind energy production plant, whatever they call them. Like, it's massive. It has 916 turbines and a 550-mile high voltage line and powers 1 million homes. And it's broken the record for wind generation on California's grid. I believe it said 5 times so far, which is insane. It produces 3.65 gigawatts of electricity, which, if you're like me, have no idea what that means. But it means, I looked it up, it means that it has the potential of being more powerful than the Hoover Dam, which seems pretty substantial. But this project comes at an interesting moment in our country when the Trump administration is pulling back from renewable energy sources to prefer more fossil fuels, coal, gas, and stuff like that. However, many states are really not taking that route, and that includes Texas, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, Illinois, Wyoming, and now there's this massive project in New Mexico that just was brought online and has been producing electricity for itself and a lot of electricity for California. So that being said, this project did not come about without some opposition from different groups other than the Trump administration. Environmental groups did raise concerns about how these wind turbines and all of the infrastructure that is needed to make this work, how that's going to impact the habitats of plant and animal species, specifically birds and their migration patterns. So they did have some concerns about that. And cultural and heritage groups, including some Native American tribes, had some concerns about the developers not complying with historic preservation rules. And they actually took them to court with that. It's still in the courts right now, and they're hoping that they'll get an outcome to either help undo some of the things that the developers did to preserve some of this cultural heritage, or at least get a response from them to address these issues. So that is still in the works. So that is still happening, and we're not sure what the outcome of that will be. I can say, from knowing a little bit about cultural resource management, a lot of times the people who have concerns about losing their cultural heritage aren't heard as much as the companies that are trying to develop property. So we'll see what happens in that space. But many see this project as a massive step forward in the renewable energy space, especially wind energy. So why does this story give me hope? It's definitely one of those stories. Most stories are. Everything's a little messy and nothing's just clear cut. Oh, this is good and this is bad. Everything is somewhere in the between, right? And this one is, right? On the one hand, renewable energy is growing. That increases electricity affordability, energy affordability. and it decreases our dependence on certain non-renewable sources, which if you're in the national security sector, that's a good thing. If you're in any sector, that's a good thing to kind of diversify where we get our energy, because energy is very important and it makes sure that people live every day. So we definitely need it. But on the other hand, the concerns of people who whose families have lived in these areas for generations and generations weren't really heard, and having to go to court to get that heard, that's a lot. So it's a messy story, right? But it does still give me hope, because one, expanding renewable energy sources. Two, it's also opening up this conversation, and this conversation about consideration and thoughtfulness when projects like this come about. And hopefully in the future, having these conversations in a more open and thoughtful way will help meet the needs of everyone, right? And that's what we want. So that's all for our weekly story that gives me hope. I hope it gives you some, and some joy moving into the weekend. And so for now, I'm going to tell you my favorite quote of all time. This is one that really inspires me. I've told it to people before. They're always like, wow, that's a super morbid quote. But I swear it gives me like energy to keep going. So here it is. It's from James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. If you haven't read it, it's great. Definitely read it. But it says, "It seems to me that one ought to rejoice in the fact of death, ought to decide indeed to earn one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life." So if you're like, yeah, that's morbid, I understand. Death is a morbid topic, but that's not what it's really saying to me. It's not like, let's all die. It's not saying that to me. It's basically saying that the reality of death makes life more meaningful, and that by earning your death, living a life worthy of death, and confronting life, tackling it with passion, is so that when that day comes, you're at peace. That's what really inspires me. That's the like confronting with passion, the conundrum of life. That's the part that really gives me like energy, and what helps me want to just like go out in the world and enjoy life and attack these issues that are happening and really make a difference. So that's why it's my favorite quote. I keep it on my desk. It's right here so that I can be reminded to confront every day with passion. And I would love to hear what people have to say about it, because I've heard some really negative feedback in the past about it. And I would love if y'all would let me know what you think. If you think it's still too morbid, it's not a good quote, please let me know. Leave a comment about your thoughts. So this week's weekly reflection is about media consumption and media boundaries. So most people get their news from several different sources. That might be social media, that might be newspapers, might be your local TV station, what have you. And a lot of times I feel like we get inundated with news 24/7, and it's just constant, just battering with what's happening in the world, which I don't really think is very good for our mental health. It's definitely not good for mine. So here are some things I do to kind of limit my news intake while also being a responsible journalist and keeping myself informed. Is I limit myself to 3 news subscriptions. So sometimes that goes down to 2 depending, but I always limit myself to 3. And one of those is going to be a national news outlet. One of those is going to be a local news outlet. And another is going to kind of be for fun. It's going to be something that gives me joy whenever I read it, stuff like that. So let's talk about what this means. So My national news outlet right now is the New York Times. I subscribe to it for their news content. I listen to the daily podcast every day, so I feel bad if I listen to people's work and I don't pay them for it. So I do subscribe for that. I also get their newsletters, and I love their cooking website. I use a lot of their recipes. You'll see a lot of their recipes that I use. Probably modified some of it, but I love that. So that is just a good, well-rounded news outlet, national news, international news outlet for me to get my news across the globe, but from one spot. So I don't feel like I have to go to a million different outlets to get what I need to know for the day. The local subscription, I cannot just advocate enough for a local news subscription. As a local journalist, as somebody who worked in a local newspaper, these guys are struggling. These local newspapers are just having a really hard time right now. And that's not the reason you should subscribe to them. I guess if you have a bleeding heart, that is a good reason to subscribe to them. But I don't think people realize how much value local news, especially a local newspaper, brings to a community, whether it's print or just digital. Like a local newspaper holds local officials accountable, make sure everybody in the community is having their voice heard, especially if it's a good one. And it just really amplifies the amount of community engagement, civic engagement that can have, and really reduces corruption. So I cannot impress on you enough to subscribe to your local newspaper. They're amazing. I do subscribe to our local one here in Atlanta. That's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm thinking about even subscribing to a one that's smaller than that, because the AJC is a massive media organization too, and it kind of feels unfair to the local groups that are really doing the groundwork to not subscribe to them. But I definitely always subscribe to your local newspaper. It's something I've always done. They're also more likely to give you the information that you actually need in your everyday life, like traffic, food, basic sustenance where you need to go to eat and stuff like that, things to do. Like, they're more likely to give you that type of news that can just really enrich your life. So I definitely recommend subscribing. If you don't subscribe to any other news outlets, subscribe to your local news outlet. They are the ones that, one, need it the most, and they're going to give you the most value for your buck, in my opinion. So definitely do that. The third one that I would say to subscribe to is one for fun. So one I used to subscribe to was National Geographic, and it's because I just loved their articles. I loved their work. I loved reading about it. It was just one that I enjoyed. It was one that I read with my grandmother growing up. So I've just always had a close connection with National Geographic. Lately, we've been subscribing to Foreign Affairs instead of National Geographic because we wanted to be more up to speed on what's happening in the national security sector and national security policy and foreign policy. So we switched over to that one. But this subscription should really just be one that either a topic you really want to know about, or a topic that is going to just bring you joy. And I think by doing that, one, you're still getting the news that you need, but you're also limiting it so that you're not inundated with just constant news all the time, because I don't think that's good either. And that's coming from a journalist. So give it a think. Consider what organizations you'd want to subscribe to, you'd want to support. I would love to be one of them, but also do what's good for you, you know? So yeah, hopefully that helps. But that is all for this week's episode of the Weekly Rise. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope what we talked about helps you move into your weekend with some joy, and you can enjoy it, and come back on Monday for Need to Know. And yeah, I'll see you next week. If you enjoyed this video, please click subscribe. You can also follow along on Instagram for behind-the-scenes moments and updates throughout the week. And to support my work directly, subscribe to my Substack and get access to my bi-weekly newsletter. Until next time, stay curious and stay grounded. Thanks, y'all.